The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, for 5 minutes.
Mr. General, I have the honor of serving as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. You were not there, but I'm sure you are aware, and if you're not aware, I'm telling on myself, that I testified against your nomination. And I did so because I was afraid that we would go back to a time where discrimination was rampant and that diversity was not appreciated and that the right to vote for minorities and African Americans would be further, more obstacles would be set up. And I listened to your opening statement and I listened to your remarks since then, and you talked about voter ID. The VC case, which in Texas ruled that their Texas voter identification law had discriminatory portions against African Americans. The district court ruled that way, the appellate court affirmed that ruling, and then you withdrew from the case after two courts ruled that it was discriminatory. How does that mesh, and then argued on the side of Texas, how does that mesh with the right to make sure that African Americans had unfettered access to the voting polls?
Congressman, the way that happened was that Texas had passed a voter ID law that the courts did not approve but struck down. Election was coming up, I believe, and the court approved a voter ID procedure that they approved for that election, and the Texas legislature then repealed its previous law that had been found to be unconstitutional or improper and passed the one that the court had approved. So we felt that the voter ID law has been approved. A proper voter ID law is constitutional, and we believe that one is constitutional, and that's why the position was changed.
And also in judging Department of Justice, in terms of nominating judges to the bench, our information tells us that out of all the judges that have been nominated, I think 91% have been white males. Does that foster diversity?
I'm not aware of the numbers, but you should look for quality candidates, and I think diversity is a matter that has significance.
Well, the National Bar Association could recommend and has recommended a number of African American and other minority attorneys who are qualified. So let me just ask you, and if you don't know the answer to these, just let me know that you'll get me the information. But how many African Americans do you have on your senior staff?
I do not have a senior staff member at this time that's an African American.
Out of all
I would note in Alabama, I participated in recommending an African American judge, and I've had judges before. And
we're talking about this administration, though, of all of the U.S. attorneys that have been nominated or confirmed, how many have been African American?
One in Alabama that I've recommended that I knew.
And I believe
he's been confirmed.
I believe it's only that one. Out of all of the special agents in charge of FBI bureaus around the country, how many are African American?
I do not know.
Would you get that for me? And here's the gist of what I'm saying. For a lot of people who objectively look from the back, like I do and many people where I live, the question is whether we're going towards inclusion and diversity or whether we're going back. So I applaud the president for his approach to the opioid epidemic, which everyone in this room is concerned about. We're losing over 100 people a day. But your decision to reverse Eric Holder's Smart on Crime initiative goes back to the crack, tough on crime, and I think you specifically said that you want the U.S. attorneys to charge and pursue the most serious, readily provable offenses and sentences. But with opioids, we're treating it as a mental health crisis. And the question becomes, from the outside looking in, is it because of who the opioid crisis is affecting as opposed to crack? Our answer to crack cocaine was mandatory minimum sentences. So the question is, how does an outside observer reconcile how we treated crack, and which led to mass incarceration, which now with the epidemic we're losing thousands and thousands of people a year, and we're treating it with hugs and kisses and treatment, as opposed to tough on crime, lock them up. How do I reconcile that and not conclude that the only difference is race and income?
Well, I would say that the federal court focuses on serious offenders, not users. We talk about international drug cartels. We talk about distribution networks, serious gangs, MS-13. We focus aggressively on that. But the PSN, the new reinvigorated crime problem, focuses more, and I've been convinced of this, on the leading criminals in a neighborhood. And the federal government will not seek mass incarceration so much as we will be focusing on identifying the people who really are the driving force, maybe sucking other young people into crime that would never have been brought in there if they hadn't had this leadership drive. It's worked in New York, it's worked in other agencies, and I think it will work here. And Congressman, I would note that the average federal sentence in the last 3 or 4 years has dropped 19%, and the federal prison population is down 14%, while we are beginning to see a spike in homicides, the likes of which we hadn't seen since the 1960s.
Time of the gentleman.